The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor clung to David Chen's expensive suit as he checked his watch for the third time. The quarterly medical board meeting would start in 15 minutes, but the waiting area outside the executive conference room felt more like a tomb than a place of healing. Leather chairs arranged in perfect rows faced a wall of windows that revealed nothing but gray Seattle sky. David loosened his tie and settled into a corner chair, his phone buzzing with urgent emails from his medical technology company. 2 years of building the business had taught him that success required constant attention, but today the sterile environment triggered memories he worked hard to suppress. A small voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I sit here?" He looked up to see a little girl, perhaps 7 years old, standing beside an 4-pole that seemed twice her height. Her hospital gown hung loose on her thin frame, and a colorful bandana covered what David suspected was a bald head underneath. Despite her pale complexion, her dark eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Of course," David said, gesturing to the chair beside him. The girl carefully maneuvered her 4-pole and settled into the oversized leather seat, her feet dangling several inches from the floor. "I'm Sophie," she announced with the confidence of someone much older. "I come here a lot for my treatments. Are you here to see someone sick too?" The question hit David like a physical blow. "In a way, yes," he managed to say. Sophie swung her legs gently, the movement causing her foreline to sway. "My mom had to work today, so I take the bus here by myself. The nurses know me really well now. Mrs. Patterson always saves me the good jello." David studied the child's face, struck by how matter-of-factly she spoke about navigating a hospital alone. "How old are you, Sophie?" 7 3/4, she replied with precision. "I've been coming here since I was 6. That's when the doctors found out why I was always so tired." She touched the bandana on her head unconsciously. "Mom says I'm brave, but sometimes I just pretend to be." The honesty in her voice made David's chest tighten. He remembered another little girl who had sat in chairs just like this one, who had worn colorful scarves to cover her head, who had tried to be brave when the world asked too much of her small shoulders. "What's your name?" Sophie asked, tilting her head to study him. "You look sad, but also kind. Like you understand things." David hesitated. In boardrooms, his name commanded immediate respect. Here, beside this wise child, he felt stripped of all pretense. "I'm David," he said simply. "Nice to meet you, David," Sophie said solemnly, extending a small hand for him to shake. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Where in the world are you from?" "I like to guess where people come from. You seem like someone important, but not scary important." David couldn't help but smile at her assessment. "I'm from here in Seattle," David replied, though the simple answer felt inadequate. Sophie nodded thoughtfully, as if filing this information away for future reference. "I knew it," she said with satisfaction. "You have that Pacific Northwest look. Calm but busy inside. My mom is from California originally, but we moved here when I got sick." "Better doctors," she said. David watched as Sophie adjusted her foreline with practiced ease, the gesture so familiar it made his heart ache. The waiting area remained empty except for them, the morning light filtering through tall windows casting long shadows across the polished floor. "Do you have kids?" Sophie asked suddenly, her question cutting through his thoughts like a scalpel. The directness of children always amazed him, their ability to ask the questions adults danced around. "I had a daughter," David said quietly, the words coming out before he could stop them. "She would have been about your age now." Sophie's expression grew serious, her young face showing an understanding that no child should possess. "Did she get sick too?" David nodded, unable to trust his voice. Sophie reached over and patted his hand with surprising gentleness. "I'm sorry," she said. "Losing someone you love must hurt worse than any treatment." The simple truth of her words nearly undid him. How could this small girl, fighting her own battle, offer such profound comfort? Before he could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor, and a nurse in bright scrubs appeared. "Sophie Martinez, there you are," the nurse called out warmly. Mrs. Patterson approached with a wheelchair, her smile genuine but tinged with concern. "Ready for today's treatment, sweetheart?" Sophie slipped down from the chair with practiced efficiency. "Do I have to use the wheelchair today? I feel pretty strong." "Hospital policy, honey," Mrs. Patterson replied gently. "But you can walk back out if you're feeling up to it." She glanced at David with polite curiosity. "I haven't seen you here before." David stood, straightening his suit jacket. "I'm here for a meeting," he said simply, not wanting to elaborate on his executive board position. Sophie looked back at him as Mrs. Patterson began wheeling her away. "Will you still be here when I get back? The treatments usually take about 2 hours." David checked his watch. His meeting would likely run longer than that, but something in Sophie's hopeful expression made him nod. "I'll try to be." As they disappeared around the corner, David sank back into his chair. The waiting area felt impossibly empty without Sophie's bright presence. He pulled out his phone to review the quarterly reports one more time, but the numbers seemed meaningless now. Instead, he found himself thinking about Emma, about the countless hours they had spent in rooms just like this one, about promises he had made that he couldn't keep. The elevator chimed, and several men in expensive suits emerged, heading toward the conference room. David recognized them as fellow board members, their faces already set in business mode. The boardroom buzzed with polite conversation as David took his seat at the mahogany table. Hospital Administrator James Morrison commanded attention at the head, his silver hair perfectly styled and his manner radiating authority. The quarterly review promised to be routine until Morrison began discussing patient demographics. "We've had some issues with our waiting areas being occupied by inappropriate visitors," Morrison announced, shuffling through his papers. "People who clearly don't belong in our executive wing, bringing down the atmosphere for our premium patients and donors." David's jaw tightened, thinking of Sophie navigating these halls with her 4-pole, of her matter-of-fact acceptance of coming here alone. "What exactly constitutes an inappropriate visitor?" he asked carefully. Morrison's smile was condescending. "You know the type. Medicaid patients, unaccompanied minors, people who treat our facility like a public waiting room. We need to maintain certain standards for our benefactors and board members." The other executives nodded in agreement, but David felt something cold settle in his stomach. The memory of Sophie's small hand patting his, her wisdom about loss and pain, made Morrison's words feel like personal attacks. "Children receiving treatment have every right to use these facilities," David said quietly. Morrison waved dismissively. "Of course, but there are designated areas for that population. What resonates most with you about maintaining excellence in healthcare?" David wondered if anyone else in this room had ever held a child's hand while machines beeped around them. The meeting droned on through budget allocations and equipment upgrades, but David's attention wandered to the windows overlooking the treatment wing. Somewhere below, Sophie was enduring procedures that would challenge most adults, doing so with a courage that humbled him. Morrison's voice cut through his thoughts. "Our new patient monitoring systems have been problematic. The vendor promises improvements, but frankly, the technology seems outdated before we even installed it." David straightened in his chair. He knew exactly which systems Morrison referenced, had reviewed the specifications months ago when his own company had bid on the contract. They had lost to a competitor offering cheaper, inferior equipment. "What specific issues are you experiencing?" David asked, his professional instincts engaging despite his emotional turmoil. "Frequent connectivity drops, inaccurate readings during critical moments," Morrison replied with obvious frustration. "Last week we had a pediatric patient whose vitals showed dangerous fluctuations that turned out to be equipment malfunction. Terrifying for the staff and parents." David's hands clenched under the table. Sophie was receiving treatment in a facility with unreliable monitoring equipment, her small body trusting machines that might fail her when she needed them most. The irony wasn't lost on him that his company's superior technology sat unused in warehouses while children like Sophie faced unnecessary risks. Have you considered alternative vendors? David asked carefully, not wanting to reveal his connection to MedTech Solutions. Morrison scoffed at David's question about alternative vendors. We're locked into a 3-year contract with our current supplier. Breaking it would cost more than the hospital can afford right now. Besides, most medical technology companies promise the world and deliver disappointment. David bit back his response, knowing that his company had built its reputation on reliability and innovation. Every system they manufactured underwent rigorous testing, especially their pediatric monitoring equipment. The thought of Sophie connected to faulty machines made his chest tight with anxiety. The meeting continued with discussions of staffing cuts and efficiency measures. David watched Morrison dismiss concerns about patient comfort with the same casual indifference he had shown toward Sophie and children like her. When the administrator suggested reducing the number of patient advocates to save costs, David finally spoke up. Patient advocacy is essential, especially for vulnerable populations, he said firmly. Children and families facing medical crises need support, not bureaucratic obstacles. Morrison's expression hardened. Mr. Chen, with respect, you're here as a financial contributor, not a healthcare policy expert. We appreciate your donations, but operational decisions require medical administrative experience. The dismissal stung, but not because of wounded pride. David thought of Sophie's small hand in his, her quiet courage, her mother working multiple jobs while her daughter faced treatments alone. What part of this story resonates most with you, he wondered, the institutional indifference or the human cost of those decisions? The meeting stretched into its second hour when Dr. Rachel Stevens burst through the conference room doors, her face flushed with urgency. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation in pediatric oncology. Equipment failure during a critical treatment session. Morrison's face darkened. Which patient? 7-year-old girl, Sophie Martinez. The monitoring system crashed during her chemotherapy infusion. We're flying blind on her vitals right now. David's blood turned to ice. He gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to bolt from his chair. Sophie's trusting face flashed before him, her small voice asking if he would still be there when she returned. Can we transfer her to another unit? Morrison asked, more concerned about logistics than the child's well-being. Dr. Stevens shook her head. She's too fragile to move mid-treatment. We need functional monitoring equipment immediately, or we'll have to stop the infusion entirely. That could compromise her entire treatment protocol. The room fell silent except for the muffled sounds of hospital activity beyond the walls. David's mind raced through technical solutions, equipment alternatives, emergency protocols he had helped design. His company's portable monitoring unit sat in a warehouse 20 minutes away, but revealing that information would expose his identity. How long until backup systems are online? Morrison demanded, his administrative mask slipping to reveal genuine panic underneath the polished exterior. Dr. Stevens checked her watch grimly. We don't have backup systems that are compatible. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. I need to see the patient, he said, his voice cutting through the panic in the room. Morrison looked at him with incredulous anger. Mr. Chen, this is a medical emergency, not a time for misplaced heroics. Please return to your seat while the professionals handle this situation. But David was already moving toward the door, his mind calculating distances and time frames. Dr. Stevens, what's the exact model of the failed monitoring system? Dr. Stevens glanced between David and Morrison uncertainly. It's a Cardiotech 3000 series. The connectivity module appears to have suffered a complete failure. David nodded grimly. He knew that system intimately, had identified its design flaws during the initial bidding process. More importantly, he knew exactly how to bypass its limitations using equipment his company had in local inventory. Morrison stepped into David's path, his face flushed with indignation. I don't know what kind of medical expertise you think you possess, Mr. Chen, but this child's life isn't the place for amateur intervention. The words hit David like physical blows, but not because of wounded pride. Morrison's dismissal echoed every moment of helplessness he had felt watching Emma slip away, every time doctors had spoken over him as if his love and desperation meant nothing in the face of their professional credentials. David pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "Dr. Stevens, I'm sending you specifications for compatible monitoring equipment that can interface with your current system. My warehouse is 20 minutes away." Morrison's face turned red with fury. "Security needs to escort this man out immediately. He's clearly having some kind of breakdown and interfering with hospital operations." But Dr. Stevens was already reading David's message, her eyes widening as she scanned the technical specifications. "These specs are incredibly detailed. How do you know our system architecture?" David looked directly at Morrison, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. "Because I'm David Chen, CEO of MedTech Solutions. We manufacture the monitoring equipment your hospital should have purchased instead of the inferior system that's currently failing Sophie Martinez." The boardroom fell silent except for the distant sound of medical alarms echoing through the building. Morrison's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, his authoritative posture crumbling as the full weight of his dismissal of David became clear. Dr. Stevens stepped forward urgently. "Can you really get compatible equipment here in 20 minutes? Sophie's condition is deteriorating without proper monitoring." David was already dialing his warehouse manager. "The equipment will be here in 15 minutes, along with my senior technician. But I need full access to Sophie's treatment room to ensure proper integration. If this story has touched your heart, you'll understand that every second counts when a child's life hangs in the balance." The pediatric treatment room buzzed with controlled urgency as David's technician worked alongside Dr. Stevens to install the new monitoring equipment. Sophie lay pale but conscious on the treatment bed, her dark eyes finding David's face as he entered the room. "You came back," she whispered, a weak smile crossing her lips. "I wasn't sure you would." David moved to her bedside, his heart breaking at how small and fragile she looked connected to multiple lines and machines. "I promised I would try," he said gently, taking her hand in his. "How are you feeling?" "Scared, but better now that you're here," Sophie admitted. "The nurses said the machines stopped working, but you fixed them somehow." Behind them, Morrison stood in the doorway looking shell-shocked, watching David's expensive monitoring equipment seamlessly integrate with the hospital systems. The displays immediately showed Sophie's vital signs in crystal-clear detail, revealing her body's response to treatment with precision the old system never could have achieved. Dr. Stevens monitored the readouts with obvious relief. "Her vitals are stabilizing beautifully. This equipment is remarkable, Mr. Chen. The clarity and accuracy are beyond anything we've had access to." David squeezed Sophie's hand gently. "Every child deserves the best possible care," he said, his words carrying the weight of personal experience. "No family should have to wonder if the technology monitoring their loved one might fail when they need it most." 3 months later, David stood in the same hospital waiting area, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed children's artwork, comfortable seating replaced the sterile leather chairs, and a small library corner invited families to find comfort in stories. The Emma Chen Memorial Pediatric Care Foundation plaque gleamed softly near the entrance. Sophie bounded toward him, her energy restored and her hair growing back in soft curls beneath a bright headband. "David, look what I drew for you," she announced, holding up a picture of 2 figures sitting together in chairs that looked remarkably like their first meeting place. "It's beautiful," David said, kneeling to her level. "How are you feeling today?" "Strong," Sophie replied with characteristic honesty. "Mom says I'm officially in remission." She gestured toward a woman approaching with a warm smile. Maria Martinez now wore the professional attire of David's company, where she worked as a patient advocate coordinator. Morrison had quietly resigned after the board reviewed his policies, replaced by Dr. Stevens, who understood that healing required both advanced technology and human compassion. The hospital now used exclusively medtech equipment, ensuring no other child would face the risks Sophie had endured. As David watched Sophie play with other children in the newly designed family area, He felt Emma's presence not as sorrow but as purpose. Where are you listening from today, he wondered, knowing that stories of second chances and unexpected connections reach hearts around the world, creating hope one moment at a time.